The Trump administration has unveiled a controversial plan. It aims to resettle white South Africans in the United States. The first group, comprising dozens of Afrikaners, is expected to arrive next week. Dulles International Airport in Virginia will be their port of entry. This move marks a significant shift in U.S. refugee policy. It has sparked intense debate, both domestically and internationally. The resettlement plan has been met with mixed reactions. Supporters laud it as a necessary measure to protect a persecuted minority. Critics, however, denounce it as racially motivated and a dangerous precedent. The Trump administration remains steadfast in its decision. It argues that these Afrikaners are fleeing violence and discrimination. The administration cites increasing attacks on white farmers in South Africa. They point to the government's land expropriation policies as evidence of persecution. This narrative, however, has been challenged by the South African government and human rights groups. They argue that the situation is far more nuanced than portrayed. The arrival of the Afrikaners is sure to draw considerable media attention. It remains to be seen how they will be received by the American public. One thing is certain, this resettlement plan has ignited a firestorm of controversy that is unlikely to die down anytime soon. The Trump administration's decision to resettle white South Africans is rooted in a complex web of justifications. The administration argues that these individuals, primarily Afrikaners, are facing persecution in their home country. They cite rising violence, discrimination, and land expropriation as key factors. Trump himself has been a vocal supporter of this narrative. He has repeatedly condemned the South African government's actions. He claims they are part of a systematic effort to target and disenfranchise the white minority. This rhetoric has resonated with his base. Many see it as a righteous defense of an oppressed group. However, critics argue that this narrative is misleading and dangerous. They point out that South Africa has a high rate of violent crime that affects all racial groups. They also argue that land reform is a necessary step to address historical injustices. These critics accuse the Trump administration of cherry-picking facts to fit a predetermined agenda. They see this resettlement plan as part of a broader pattern of white nationalism and xenophobia. The administration's justifications have been met with skepticism from many quarters. Human rights groups, academics, and even some members of the US government have expressed concerns. They argue that this policy sets a dangerous precedent by prioritizing one group of refugees over others based on race. The debate over the legitimacy of the administration's claims is likely to continue. The South African government has vehemently denounced the Trump administration's resettlement plan. They have called it politically motivated and an affront to South Africa's sovereignty. The South African foreign minister released a scathing statement. It accused the US of hypocrisy and double standards. The statement highlighted the plight of refugees from war-torn countries. It questioned why the US was so quick to offer refuge to white South Africans. South Africa insists that it is a multiracial democracy committed to protecting the rights of all its citizens. They argue that the Trump administration's portrayal of South Africa is inaccurate and inflammatory. The South African government has also expressed concern about the vetting process for the Afrikaner refugees. They want assurances that individuals with criminal records or ties to extremist groups will not be granted entry into the US. The diplomatic fallout from this resettlement plan has been significant. It has strained relations between the two countries. The South African government has vowed to monitor the situation closely. They are prepared to take further action if necessary. The international community is watching with bated breath. The Trump administration's decisions to resettle white South Africans has ignited a fierce debate about the future of US refugee policy. Critics argue that this move represents a radical departure from established norms and values. They fear it signals a shift towards a more racialized and exclusionary approach to refugee resettlement. The fact that this is the first major resettlement initiative since Trump took office is not lost on observers. They see it as a deliberate attempt to prioritize certain groups over others. The administration, however, maintains that this is simply a case of responding to a specific humanitarian crisis. They argue that the US has a moral obligation to help those facing persecution. The long-term implications of this policy shift remain unclear. However, it has undoubtedly set a precedent it will be difficult for future administrations to ignore. The debate over who deserves refuge and what criteria should be used to determine eligibility is likely to intensify. One thing is certain. The Trump administration's decision to resettle white South Africans will have far-reaching consequences for